Hi, my name is Graham McCracken, and I was just on the Smarter Online Safety podcast. I recommend that everybody tune in and have a listen. We cover a bunch of different stuff that everybody can learn from. We cover bug bounties, penetration testing, AI security, and a whole lot more. So have a listen. Thanks.
Welcome, everyone, to the Smarter Online Safety Podcast. I'm your host, Jocelyn King, the Queen of Online Safety and founder of smarteronlinesafety.com. We have got a fascinating guest today. When he's not democratizing security for small businesses or finding vulnerabilities in applications, you'll find Grant McCracken trail running with Quartz, his Australian Shepherd, who serves as Dark Horse's unofficial chief security dog and his windowsill guardian. Or Grant will be making music, writing, and hitting the slopes in his home base of Lake Tahoe. He's here today to help us understand cybersecurity and explain why he believes every application has vulnerabilities waiting to be found, why over 60% of breaches start with human error, and how his company lives up to its name, Dark Horse, as the unlikely dark horse that might just revolutionize how we think about cybersecurity accessibility. Hey, welcome to the show, Grant.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
That is so great. So let's tell people a bit about your company. You offer a free bug bounty program while competitors of yours charge tens of thousands of dollars and yours is free. So first of all, for our listeners who are like, what? What is a bug bounty program?
Sure. Um, So, in order to understand bug bounty, we may have to go one level higher or one level deeper, depending on how we're looking at this thing.
Uh-huh.
Um, so, every application or organization needs to have some degree of offensive security, right? So that's where you're looking at it from the perspective of a hacker and saying, how could I potentially break things? Because people that are builders aren't necessarily the same people that think about breaking things, right?
Right.
The way that again a hacker looks at the world is just a little bit different, and so they're able to bring a unique set of skills and perspectives to testing your application, right? So say you've got like a web application or something like that.
Mhm.
So typically what the way you'll get access to that is you'll perform something called a penetration test, right? So you'll go to a consultancy or something like that and you'll say, hey, I need a pen test. That's penetration test for short, where the
Where they're basically attempting to penetrate your company or your
nailed
website,
it.
whatever. Mhm. Okay.
Yep. So typically that's how organizations will approach application security, network security, things of that nature. Um, where bug bounties get really interesting is when you say, okay, what if I just invited the whole world to hack me? And the very first reaction to most organizations have is like, whoa, wait a minute, like that sounds super scary.
Mhm.
But the reality is the bad guys don't need your permission to hack you, right? So the bad guys are doing it anyways, right?
Right.
So like all you're doing is leveling the playing field, and you say, okay, I want to invite anybody that's an ethical hacker or anybody that is not looking to be nefarious here.
Mhm.
If they can report a vulnerability to me,
Right.
I'll pay them a certain amount of money. And so you say for vulnerabilities of these natures, I'll pay you this much money, and so on and so forth. And so there's whole platforms that have
And all the big companies,
hundreds.
right? Like Apple and Google and
Yeah,
Samsung,
Facebook.
Amazon, all
Yep.
Facebook.
Yeah, all those organizations have bug bounties, but there's a ton of organizations that have bug bounties that are a lot smaller. It can be a little onerous to run your own bug bounty program, and that's why these platforms exist, right? So, for instance, you've got HackerOne, you have BugCrowd, you have Integrity, and a few others, and Dark Horse as well, right? So, but fundamentally, that's what a bug bounty is where you invite hackers of all natures to come tell you about vulnerabilities before they're exploited by bad actors in the wild,
Right.
and you pay them for it. And it's a super economical model too, because if people don't find anything, you don't pay anything.
Right.
So, um,
And by the way,
yeah,
all the companies that started doing this were doing this because if you're really good at at technology, let's say, and software in particular, and you find something, you're up against that crime of opportunity decision of, are you going to sell it on the dark web and make a small fortune, or are you going to report it and not get paid anything? And so these companies all put together reward systems or bug bounties, right, to encourage people to be good ethical hackers and not bad black hat
Yeah.
hackers selling
And
things.
it's also just a fantastic way of
Mhm.
also improving your security. So it's not even
Right.
as, yes, part of it is like a response uh to the dilemma of like, oh, I found a vulnerability, should I exploit this or report it and get nothing, right?
Right.
It also levels the playing field for, you bring out all these people that are professionals during their day jobs, say they're a
Yeah.
consultant for a big four, they want to make a little extra money, or they just like to hack, right? People that like to hack and maybe want to get into hacking. It's a great on ramp, but also it it is a force multiplier in terms of you being effective in terms of identifying vulnerabilities. There's nothing more effective, and I've been in application security for 13 plus years. There's nothing more effective than a bug bounty at identifying vulnerabilities at scale. It is just unmatched because if you have a pen test, you have one person, one perspective. Say you had five people, you probably would find more because there's new perspectives. And when you balloon that out to like 5,000, you get so many unique perspectives and vulnerabilities at a scale that, again, nothing else can even come close to.
Right. And I've spent 2 decades in Silicon Valley working in tech companies, and even hardware companies have more software engineers than hardware engineers. But I have yet to meet any software engineer or gamer or coder who doesn't love a good competition. And
Oh
gamification
yeah,
was invented not just for, you know, kids and adults who like to play things, but it's really a great competition. And so they get to compete to help keep us all safe at the end of the day is what you're doing. So that's great.
absolutely. Yeah.
So, question for you then, because you founded Dark Horse, with the mission to make proactive cybersecurity accessible for organizations of all sizes and budgets, because it's really been limited. Bug bounties are expensive it's not just the bounty, they're expensive to implement. And so what was your aha moment? Because you were a bug crowd for a decade, right? And what was your aha moment that made you realize the industry was failing individual entrepreneurs and small and mid-sized businesses, and you wanted to do something about it?
Yeah. Less of an aha moment, it more of just what's next moment, right?
Uh,
So after I left Bug Crowd in 2024, I sat around and I was like, okay, what's next, right? And I'm passionate about a lot of things. For instance, I don't know, like it's the thing I always joke about, but like I'd love to open like a smoothie stand. I don't know why. Every time I go get a smoothie, why do they have to put sugar in this thing? Anyways, that's a tangent, right? But so I'm passionate about health. I'm passionate about, fitness and healthcare and all these different things, right? But realistically, I've got a dozen years of experience in application security. So if I wanted to go do good, where am I going to do the most good, right? The most effective good. That's going to be in the application security space. And so, okay, so how could I do good there? Well, I also know that bug bounties are incredibly effective. I know that everybody needs to have a vulnerability disclosure program. I know that pen testing can be expensive and onerous for organizations. So let's solve those problems. So we made pen testing easy, efficient, and affordable. Made bug bounties accessible, vulnerability disclosure programs accessible, and that's kind of the goal, right? Just to make those things more available and remove the hurdles for people that you know need to be doing those things.
Well, this is so important, and our listeners who listen regularly hear all the time about the vulnerabilities of small businesses, that they're the number one most attacked over corporates and even individuals because they have the biggest payload and the least amount of security. So, and whether you're a small business owner or not, if you're listening, you do business with small businesses. You have a veterinarian and a dentist and a tax preparer. And if you're not going with a major corporation, you're doing business with small business owners. Even where hairdressers and manicurists and stuff have this, and they have data from you and credit card information and stuff. So for small business owners and everybody else who does business with some small business, I have a question for you about that because you've stated that every application has vulnerabilities just waiting to be found. So for the business owners who are listening, who either think their systems are secure because they don't really know everything they're up against, or know they're not secure but don't know what to do about it. What could you tell them about how they could set up a bug bounty program and why they'd want to, and why people who do businesses with small business owners might want to encourage them to do that as well to help protect their data?
Yeah. So the first thing I would draw is a little bit of a line. So first off, every organization, regardless of your size, needs to be thinking about cybersecurity. But in terms of the utility of a bug bounty, um, small sort of brick and mortar businesses probably less likely to get a lot of utility out of it just because they're not using their own software, right? So like for instance, you'll use, I don't know, Salesforce or whatever the vet software is, or I don't know, like the place where my we take our dog for doggy daycare, right? Found a vulnerability on their site the other day. Just doing a booking. But um in those cases, right, they're just using someone else's software, right? So but if you're building your own software or have
Mhm.
your own unique attack surface that you've kind of layered on top, then if you've written your own code, I can almost guarantee there's some vulnerability of some nature in there. And that's not like me being like you're stupid. It's just that like no matter who's writing the code, including myself, right? So like I run programs and pen tests against my own code, right? That I wrote for Dark Horse, and there's vulnerabilities in there, right? Like at BugCrowd or HackerOne, right? And these are security companies. You can actually go look at their you can look at their bug bounty programs, and it'll say like, oh, like we paid this person this amount for such and such a vulnerability. Now sometimes it doesn't give like you the vulnerability details, but you can see like thousands and thousands of dollars are spent on vulnerabilities created by security companies. So it stands to reason that if you're creating any kind of code or software or anything of that nature, right, you're probably going to have vulnerabilities in there. And so it makes sense that you would then engage in practices that are going to help you identify those vulnerabilities proactively, because the last thing you want is somebody exposing those vulnerabilities. Say for instance, and I don't have any context around like what they did or didn't do. But like a really good example in the recent news was like the T app. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but um, like they had a ton of vulnerabilities that were not particularly complex, but that completely destroyed their business. I don't know if people are ever going to use that app again, but it was growing. Like people were talking about it. It had a bunch of positive momentum, but security is what doomed it. And it may yet come back in another iteration, but I have a hard time believing it's going to have the same trust that it had previously. And so, um,
Well, and
yeah,
we've all, at a large scale, everybody witnessed over the past, decade, the Facebook vulnerabilities and Zoom during COVID when everybody was on Zoom and all the meeting bombing that was happening with people jumping in because there wasn't standardized security. It's rare that any company building applications brings security in at the ground level. And if they do, it's usually because they've had some experience, negative experience with hacking and understand why they have to build it in. But usually it's an afterthought. And then trying to patch it afterwards, frankly, is less secure than building it from the ground up, right? So you're always playing catch up.
yeah, and it's security is always going to be a bit of cat and mouse, right?
Right.
You're never going to be ahead of the attackers, right?
Right.
That just doesn't exist, right? Like you're always reacting, but um still like the sooner and the more proactive you are, right, the less time or opportunity there is for a bad actor to take advantage of it.
Right. Now let's go back to something you said though, because you're pointing out that even your company and all of these and there's over 4,000 cybersecurity companies in the US alone, and there's over 24,000 globally. All of them have vulnerabilities. All of them can get hacked. And so when you think about that, and they're in the business of cybersecurity, and then you think of every other software that you use, and more importantly, every company you do business with that uses somewhere north of 100 different types of software all integrated, right? And every time you hook two pieces of software together, you've got a vulnerability. And every time you update a patch for one of them, you've got a vulnerability. So, it's just the amount of vulnerabilities that can be created in a day, let alone a month or a year, is really staggering. And we're all doing business, and our data is sitting inside of these companies using this. So even if you're not a company building an application or writing code, and you're using all this, you have you're introducing vulnerabilities into your business through the choices of software you're making. And as consumers, who we're choosing to do business with, our data is in their hands. And frankly, it's in hands of all these companies. Most of our data is mostly in the hands of companies we don't even know exist, that we're not intentionally doing business with, but are part of the ecosystem of these companies. So when you think about it, what could you tell people so that everybody doesn't feel like they want to go crawl under a rock and throw their phone away? About how, I mean, how can we fix the problem and be fixing the vulnerabilities, which is what you're in the business of doing?
Just you got to be proactive, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's all you really can do, right? I mean, there's a lot of it's education, right? So the more educated your developers are, the less vulnerabilities they're gonna have. And there's also something to be said for you touched on it during the intro. Over 68% of vulnerabilities, as per the Verizon data breach report, start at the human layer. So
Mhm.
that's things like someone clicking on a phishing email or something like that. So like you can significantly, like, so if you're an organization, right, what you want to do, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, right, but I mean, the first thing I do if I we're trying to secure an organization, the first thing I'd go after is the people. And that's not like go after them with a stick, but
No.
with a carrot. And
Phishing and social engineering and stuff, and we've covered some of
yeah,
that in previous
and
episodes.
you want to make sure that they everybody understands that, like, security is everybody's job. Like, sure, you got your like actual job, but if you're in finance, you have access to super sensitive information. It's your job to protect that information. HR, same concept.
Mhm.
Sales, same concept, right? So like everybody has access to, or everybody needs to be thinking about security as being part of their job. But another big thing that organizations, it's important for organizations to do is also to adopt like a security framework, right? So some of those frameworks are like SOC 2 or ISO, or there's the NIST cybersecurity framework. I'm actually giving a talk about that at GSX in.
And for most of our listeners who are not cybersecurity experts, these are all industry standards of the best practices. So NIST
Yep.
and so are the standards that are so far the most effective that we have and are implemented by everybody who works in cybersecurity.
Yeah, and they help you just think about the things that you may not be thinking about, right? So like you touched on, like, effectively supply chain security, right? Like you were talking about like all these different vendors that you're bringing in. And so one of the pieces to the NIST cybersecurity framework is, okay, understand like have a policy as it relates to how you integrate with your supply chain vendors, right? And what are your expectations of them, right? So like if you're going to be a vendor of us, I want to see your pen test report. I want to know that you're taking security seriously. And then how do we communicate in case of like an incident, and what are your controls and so on and so forth. And so just having a framework. I'm not sure if this is what you were asking in terms of like
Well, no,
what's a
this is very helpful because it's good for people to
yeah.
understand. But also, I want to double click on something you said because you were talking about what the most common human vulnerabilities are that you're seeing in business. And frankly, they're the same thing everybody has in their everyday life, right? Clicking on a phishing email, whether you're inside a corporation or inside your Yahoo or Gmail account at home, it's the same thing. It's a phishing email that is going to install malware and stuff. So talk a little bit more about the human vulnerabilities and what you see them being, what the most dangerous ones are, because they apply not just to companies, but to families.
Yeah, I mean it's exactly what you just talked about, right? It's phishing. I'm particularly concerned about the future of phishing in today's AI era, where you can clone a voice, you can make pictures look compelling. That's that's something that I think that we're going to see only an increase in over time. And it's becoming increasingly hard to like disambiguate, what's real and what's not, right? Whether that be, you know, fake news or images or audio or video, right? So
Mhm.
that's a really big one. Obviously, the things that people do online, again, so not just from a phishing perspective, but going to malicious websites or downloading, malicious executables, and then you install malware on your device, and now the attackers got a foothold inside the network, and then they're able to propagate throughout the network, right? So those are other things. I mean, just sending more information than you should,
Mm.
using
Mhm.
weak passwords,
Oh,
not
yes.
using multi-factor, all those things, right? So like, I mean, for instance, cred stuffing attacks, right? And that's literally the
That's
technical term
credential
for it.
stuffing. Yeah, which
Yes.
is so can you explain what credential stuffing is for our listeners?
Yeah. So there's breaches all the time, and then turns out they didn't properly, uh, hash and salt the passwords, which is how you're supposed to protect your passwords in a database. And so in these breaches, and they're just available on the internet, there's emails and there's passwords. And so you as an attacker, you go out and you create a list of all these, either common passwords or passwords that email or user has used in the past, and then you go find other places that user, a bank, something like that, right? There was a situation in Australia earlier this year where people lost their retirement savings due to cred stuffing accounts or attacks,
So they're
because
literally
they
taking a known email, like they find a legitimate Yahoo or Gmail account, and then they try every one with most common passwords, like which literally are password 123 or 1234566 or things like that, and they're going to hit, they're going to hit gold in some of them because people are actually using those.
and also the password that you've historically used. So if you
Right.
use a password, it got used in a breach, or it got popped in a breach, they're
Mhm.
going to throw that and your email together, and they're going to see if they can get access. So again, just having multi-factor helps mitigate
Right.
by a
So
huge amount.
multi-factor authentication, most people listening to us probably know what that is, but for new people turning in and people who don't, it's where you are then getting, you're either using an authentication app or you're getting an email or an SMS text to your phone saying, is this you? And confirming that it's you before it lets you in. So
Yep,
that you could be sitting at home and a hacker could correctly guess your login, but you're going to get an alert on your phone. You're trying to access your account. You're going to say, no, this is not me. And you'll just have stopped them getting in. But if you don't have that turned on, they would have gotten in and who knows how long it would be until you knew.
exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
So those are just some of the,
Now, that's a great list. Thank you. And
yeah.
that's really good for everybody to hear. And we repeat that list periodically because you can't hear it too many times. Even people who know what to do set up new accounts, or they forget to go in and check that to see if there was a hack of their website, if they're not using a password manager that tells them this was, breached recently and you need to update it. They don't have ways of getting push alerts to them that they need to update it. They could have an out of date password to a really important account. So this is really great reminder. Thank you for that.
Yep. Yeah.
Now I want to get into talking about AI a bit because AI generated code. Um, so like I said, I've been based in Silicon Valley for a while. I worked in tech, for over 2 decades now. But what I would say is a lot of uh, people are either familiar with this fact or not, but a lot of code is being generated by AI now. And so a lot of software engineers are concerned that their jobs are going away. They're turning into people who are writing prompts, the instructions for what kind of code to write, things like that. But with AI generated code happening at every company we do business with, frankly, and every company that's coming up and we're about to do business with, you've been warning about the new security risks. And so could you tell everybody what are some specific examples of the types of vulnerabilities you're seeing from AI written code?
You've got the same vulnerabilities, fundamentally speaking, right? So like the same
The
application
same as if they had
vulnerability.
written the code themselves.
Yeah. So
Okay.
what AI is just a computer, right? And so
Mhm.
like computers do what you tell them to do. So you say, write code that enables me to have an app that does X, Y, and Z. So it writes the app that like does X, Y, and Z. Now, again, it's never that simple, right? Like there's still a lot of all the like it's super useful, just so we're clear, right? Sometimes when you're using something like cursor, you're just pressing tab, 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 because it's just auto completing. But um I think it's a little overblown, right? You can write a little bit more code, a little bit faster, and you can do kind of more than you could before, but you still need like a person to be sitting there because it'll get stuck on itself pretty often.
And it's kind
um
of giving you a first pass, not a finished product. You still gotta, even
yeah,
even people who use it for writing emails know this, that it gives you a good first draft, but you still gotta edit it and customize it to what you need.
yeah, and it'll do exactly what you tell it to do. So there's a buddy of mine, he did a thing where he like taught kids about computers, I think, and the analogy was he did like and yeah, obviously it's not this simplistic, but like he was like making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And
Mhm.
so he's like, okay, how do I make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? And they're like, put the jelly on the bread and put the peanut butter on the bread. And so you like pick up the jar of jelly and you put the jar of jelly on the bread. And it's like, okay, it's on the
Do
bread. Like,
exactly what they told you to do. I love that.
yeah, it'll do what you tell it to do. So it'll make the app that you said to do. You said, let this, make it so that users can do X, Y, and Z. You didn't say, like, don't let this user in this one race condition access this one thing this one way, right? So, like, there's all these different, like, and again, it's the same as like people writing code, right? Like, if you're not actively thinking about it, you're just saying, okay, here's what I want the app to do, here's how the app should function, or here's how this should work, and then you go do that. You're not necessarily thinking about how you could abuse that. And that's the beauty of the hacker mindset, is that, and exactly why you have to test things, even after you build something, that's, you're doing this dynamic testing on what you've built. um you get somebody like myself, or somebody that we work with, coming in and looking at the app and saying, huh, how could I break this, or what if they didn't think about this, and they're doing things in ways that one of my favorite vulnerabilities is something called an IDOR. It's an insecure direct object reference, which a lot of gobbledygook. But so say for a really common example is like you have like invoice equals 1234, right?
Mhm.
And so the person that wrote that code was like, okay, so users should be able to access their invoices by going to / invoice, and then it'll show the invoice of the invoice reference number, right? But like what they didn't think about is like, what if somebody tried to access the next invoice, 1235,
Mhm.
1236?
Because it's
Oh,
just a sequential.
so
Yeah.
you needed to write into your code, which again, if you didn't tell AI to do it, it didn't do it. You need to tell it, hey, make sure that you have to go do like a database check. Like, does this user have access to the organization that should be able to access this invoice or whatever, right? So like you have to
Check the security clearance before
yeah.
you
Anyways,
beyond.
long story short, AI written code has the exact same problems as human written code, except now you're doing it at scale, and you're doing and you're possibly checking it less because you have people that aren't thinking about it as much, and so there's a huge proliferation of the technical term in the industry is vibe coding, right? I think people have heard about that, but it's
Not everybody. Just tell so
okay.
for the listeners who
Vibe
don't
coding.
know.
Yeah. Vibe coding is just like, you're like, you're just kind of having AI slop some stuff together, and you end up with things like what we talked about earlier with, again, I can't prove that.
Right. You're having AI
um
do the coding for you while you're catching up on the Netflix binge watch or something like that.
yeah, it you very may well have created some vulnerabilities in the process.
Well, let me ask you a question, because what you're bringing up a great point, and the way around that, even when I'm having AI write something for me, you know, your prompt is everything, right? Most people don't know how to give it a really good prompt, because that's how you end up with a jar of peanut butter on top of a slice of bread. But does that also mean there's a lot of potential for having a really good detailed prompt around the security aspect that can be automatically built in, so that is there an opportunity in your mind that we might actually be able to get more secure things by having non-cybersecurity trained software developers giving the AI coding software a really good cybersecurity a prompt so that it makes a more secure software, it makes more secure software code than if the coder themselves had done it? Is there a possibility that we could get better?
Absolutely. Yeah. And
So there's hope.
uh yeah, well, yeah, again, but you and I'm not totally sure about like all the nuances about it. So like I won't pretend to be an expert. But you still, right? So if you say like run security checks on everything I just wrote, right? You're going to have to be super explicit, right? Same problem is what you run into. So if you say again, just run security checks, it'll go look for like certain things, but maybe not other things, and it may look in like a certain context, but like it's not looking at the larger context, and it is highly effective at being able to do that. But you have to get super specific in terms of like, okay, look at it through this lens and this way for these vulnerabilities and so on and so forth. And so that's where you get a lot of like tooling, right? And so we've got AI sort of code review stuff, right? Again, a lot of advantages to it. It's not like we didn't have code review before though. Just so we're clear on this. So like the people that were already using code review software are now using AI code review software, which again, it's improving the robustness of what they're building. But the people that aren't using anything are still not using anything. Now, again, you can try to like bake those into like the software cursor or whatever as you're going, but yeah, I think there's absolutely potential for it, right? It already exists, right? So like you just have to be willing to use the tools, right? So you can't just be like, oh, I wrote some code and it's good to go. You have to be like, okay, now we're going to go run it through, some tooling that's going to potentially identify vulnerabilities, and then you also just have to think of it. Um, you still have to do the dynamic testing, because even then you're still going to get stuff that slips through, just because like there's vulnerabilities that you don't really think about in terms of like it may be working as it was designed, but like it can be exploited in a way that you hadn't necessarily considered, right? That again, you see that all the time, and it's again just like a further permutation of uh of what we were just talking about, right? Where like it did exactly what you told it to, and you built it the way that you meant it to be built. And in that context, it's reasonably secure from like most vulnerabilities, but within the context of something else, it's actually a vulnerability itself, right? And so,
No, that
and
makes
I
sense.
know I'm giving a bad example there, but hopefully that makes sense. So
No, that
absolutely, AI is there's a lot of good potential for it as well.
That's awesome. Well, and with that, AI has so changed, the world. I mean, when you think back, there was a joke in 2019 pre-COVID of, what was the most useless purchase of 2019? A 2020 planner. And I think that the same could be said with 2022 when AI, when ChatGPT changed everything. So it's really hard anymore to even look 5 years ahead and think that we're going to have any kind of a crystal ball. But we still need to be directionally right as individuals, as businesses, as large corporations, small entrepreneurs. But when you think of what we're going through right now and bug bounty programs and AI code and all of this, what do you think fundamentally needs to change you know, in the industry to really protect people and small businesses like you're doing?
Uh, there's also the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Ah, yeah.
So like,
Sometimes that's
um,
good. Then you can predict better.
I mean, what needs to change, what needs to happen? You just got to take security seriously.
Yeah.
Like that's that, and I know that sounds, oh, you just do that, right? And of course, it's made up of like 15,000 little things underneath, but um, everybody, not everybody, a lot of people say, oh, we're committed to security, or
Mhm.
we're whatever we do, such and such for security. But I think actually meaning it, right, and actually executing on that, right, when we talk about the perils of AI, or even what we're developing or what we're implementing, right? I mean, we didn't even get into like um, sort of everybody implementing AI at organizations, right? So like we talked about like the vulnerabilities that vibe coding can introduce, but like you've also got AI vulnerabilities just from like poor implementation. You give it access to too much information, it doesn't have good guardrails, and you just
It doesn't separate privileged and confidential or restricted information from non,
yeah.
and it puts it in a general database for everybody.
There's so many examples of like somebody just like within an organization, you can just walk up and be like, oh, like hand me like the financial planning models for like next year, or
And you can get
it.
them. Yeah, and
Yeah.
and every day there's some company doing damage control from some of that where an
Yeah.
employee or anybody got access to things they shouldn't.
Yeah. So it's like everybody, it's so easy to say, oh, we take security seriously and it's a priority for us. But then, like, when it really comes down to it, no, like, let's just shovel AI down whatever we can. And like, security is also an afterthought. And then when the next new technology comes along, that's going to just get thrown out there before security gets a real good pass at it. So it's just taking security seriously. It's making it everybody's security is everybody's job. It's something everybody needs to be thinking about. It's something the organization needs to have. And again, that's just part of like all these different frameworks, right? Like again, you sit down, you agree on like, okay, so like what are our risk tolerances, and sort of how do we think about security? And so what
And
needs
that's
to
true for families as well as small businesses and large
yeah,
commercial.
yeah. Where I mean it's have a little family board meeting. All right, what
Yeah,
are our
there
risk
you
tolerances? Where's our risk register? You got a list of the cookies may attract ants, but so but you have to so like again, it's as much as I'd love to be like, oh, there's some like super novel thing that we have to do. We just have to take security seriously. Like that's the thing that if you take security seriously, it's not like we haven't seen this before. It's not like we haven't witnessed new technology or too quickly
any
implemented
kind of
things
a
or
disruptive technology that comes in and gets implemented without being fully thought through of how to do it securely, right?
yeah.
Just
And there was a talk someone gave at B-sides in San Francisco earlier this year, where they talked about how um their premise was like it's the these aren't all new vulnerabilities. We've seen this all before, like as a security community, right? So,
Mhm.
like, for instance, when you're looking at vulnerabilities, and I don't mean to go too far into the weeds, but you've got like input validation issues or output validation issues, right? Where you take user input at its face value and then it goes and breaks things on the back end, right?
But
That's
basically,
not
it's a model, and it almost doesn't matter whether it's a chat GPT or anything that came before it that's a new
or
technology. You still have to apply the same framework and model to do it.
exactly.
Mhm.
And so what are the potential risks,
Mhm.
threat modeling, and so as long as you're thinking through that. So again, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Just it's good security hygiene
Right.
is what needs to happen, and it has to be the way we approach security has to be for real.
Mhm.
It can't just be words, which it
Right.
very often is.
Well, you bring up a good point because I think one of the biggest risks that AI is actually bringing into companies is this the speed at which every organization feels it has to implement AI to be competitive or relevant, to speak to whether it's investors or shareholders or the employees of, oh my gosh, we got to have our AI strategy, and everybody's scrambling. And what happens when you scramble is you can forget small and seriously important details. So I think your rallying cry for just keeping security the priority while you're implementing at the fastest pace you can safely is really, really important. And just to bring all of this back home to what you do, I would just like to say, certainly with all of this and this kind of um, this uncertainty and this shaking the snow globe up that ChatGPT and AI overall has done. Um, Certainly, one of the best ways to make sure that the company is safe or anything is penetration testing, and doing all that. So it brings it back to what you do. So you basically started your company at the perfect time to really be able to help companies that are going maybe too fast, but really trying to be at scale with adopting AI, help be safer, right? So they can actually come to you, do a implement a bug bounty program, and look for the help from the outside of experts to try to get in and test their penetration skills on and make that company safer, and therefore every consumer, every client, every customer who does business with them, make them safer.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. And so for people who want to learn more about Dark Horse and as a small business or startup, and also who are just really curious to learn more about bug bounties and all of this, where should they go to find out more about you and Dark Horse?
Yeah. So you can find out more about Dark Horse at darkhorse.sh. Um, and you can find me on LinkedIn, Grant McCracken. And then if you search security or Dark Horse, should disambiguate pretty quickly to just be me. I think I'm the only Grant McCracken doing this. And then
And the spelling of your last name is MC.
McCracken.
There you go.
And then you can also email me at grant@darkhorse.sh if that's too confusing otherwise. But yeah, I mean we're here to help, and the mission of Dark Horse, just to be super clear,
Yeah.
is to make security accessible to organizations of all sizes and budgets. And so um even if your organization isn't able to afford full price penetration test, we've got testers that'll work pro bono, and I'm happy to work pro bono. So if you want to be secure, you don't even have to be a nonprofit. If you just are trying to become more secure but you don't have the money to do so, or you don't have the resources or the know-how, right? I'm here to help, right? Like that's kind of the goal here.
That
And
is so
so
awesome. I
yeah.
can't tell you how huge that is in a space that is a, you know, $1 trillion cybercrime situation with billions of dollars in cybersecurity and very high premiums for most companies to become secure. This is an enormous service that you offer. And really, thank you so much for everything you're doing to make us safer and make the world a safer place. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is so great. Well, everybody, as you can see, you know why I was so excited to have Grant on, and he's just fascinating. We could literally talk for hours. But I just want to thank you, Grant, for being here and taking the time. And thanks everyone for listening. And until next time, stay safe out there.